The morning sun barely made it through the dirty window of the small apartment on Oak Street. Rosa Martinez stood in her tiny kitchen, staring at the empty cabinets with hollow eyes. She had opened and closed them 3 times in the past hour, hoping somehow food would magically appear. But the shelves remained empty, just like they had been for the past 2 days. In the next room, she could hear her 3 children stirring awake. 8-year-old Miguel was the first to wake up, as always. He was responsible for his age, maybe too responsible. He helped take care of his little sisters without being asked. 5-year-old Carmen was next, her cheerful voice already filling the small space. And then there was little Ana, only 4 years old, who used to wake up asking for breakfast every morning. But Ana hadn't asked for food in 2 days. That scared Rosa more than anything else. Rosa closed the cabinet door one more time and leaned against the counter. Her hands were shaking, but not from the cold. The apartment was actually too warm, because she couldn't afford to pay the electric bill, and the air conditioning had been turned off weeks ago. She was shaking because she was scared. Scared and tired and completely out of options. 2 weeks ago, she had been cleaning offices downtown. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid enough to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. Rosa had been proud of that job. She worked hard, stayed late when needed, and never complained about the long hours. She thought she was safe there. Then the company decided to hire a cheaper cleaning service. Just like that, Rosa and 12 other workers were told not to come back. No warning, no second chances. The supervisor had handed her a final paycheck and said he was sorry, but business was business. Rosa had tried everything since then. She'd applied at grocery stores, restaurants, and other cleaning companies. She'd even asked for work at the local laundromat, willing to do anything to earn some money. But everyone wanted someone who could start immediately, and Rosa couldn't afford childcare while she worked. Her neighbor used to watch the kids sometimes, but she moved away last month. The food banks in the area were empty too. Rosa had swallowed her pride and gone to 3 different places, but they all said the same thing. Too many people needed help, not enough donations coming in. They put her name on a waiting list, but waiting lists don't feed hungry children. She'd even tried calling her cousin in California, the only family she had left. But his number was disconnected, and she realized she didn't even know his new address. Rosa had been on her own for so long that she'd forgotten how to ask for help. Miguel walked into the kitchen, his dark hair messy from sleep. He looked up at his mother with those serious brown eyes that reminded Rosa of her late husband. "Mama, is there any cereal left?" he asked quietly. Rosa's heart broke a little more. She knelt down to his level and brushed his hair back from his forehead. "Not today, baby, but maybe later, okay?" Miguel nodded like he understood, even though he was only 8. He'd been understanding too much lately. Children shouldn't have to understand why there's no food in the house. Carmen came bouncing in next, her energy still bright despite everything. She wrapped her arms around Rosa's leg and looked up with a big smile. "Good morning, Mama. What's for breakfast?" Rosa picked up her middle daughter and held her close. Carmen was still young enough to believe that mothers could fix anything, that food would always appear when she was hungry. Rosa didn't want to break that trust, but she was running out of ways to keep the promise. "How about we play a game today?" Rosa said, trying to keep her voice cheerful. "We can pretend we're explorers, and explorers sometimes have to wait for their food." Carmen giggled and clapped her hands. "Like pirates?" "Yes, like pirates." But Miguel was watching Rosa with those 2 serious eyes. He knew this wasn't a game. Little Ana appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas. She didn't say anything, just walked over and sat on the floor near Rosa's feet. Ana had been the most talkative of the 3 children, always chattering about her dreams and the stories she made up. But she'd grown quiet over the past few days. She would sit for long periods, just looking around with her big dark eyes. Rosa picked up Ana too, holding both her daughters close. The weight of them felt good and terrible at the same time. Good because they were healthy and safe in her arms. Terrible because she didn't know how to keep them that way. The eviction notice on the front door seemed to mock her every time she looked at it. 3 days late on rent, and the landlord was already threatening to throw them out. Rosa had begged for more time, but Mr. Johnson said he had bills to pay too. He wasn't a bad man, just a man running a business. But right now, Rosa couldn't even think about the rent. All she could think about was the empty feeling in her stomach and the way Aina had stopped asking for food. She set the girls down and opened the refrigerator, even though she knew what she'd find. A half-empty container of milk that would go bad soon and a few packets of ketchup from the last time they'd gotten takeout. That was 3 weeks ago, back when Rosa still had a job. Miguel was looking in the cabinets now, probably hoping his mother had missed something. Rosa watched him stand on his tiptoes to reach the higher shelves, checking behind the old coffee can and the empty cereal boxes she hadn't thrown away yet. "Mama," Miguel said, his voice small. "Carmen and Aina are really hungry." Rosa knew that Miguel was hungry too, but he was trying to be the man of the house. At 8 years old, he was worrying about his little sisters instead of asking for his own breakfast. "I know, baby. Mama's working on it." But Rosa wasn't working on anything. She was completely out of ideas. She checked every pocket, every drawer, every corner of the apartment for forgotten change. She counted the few coins she had at least 20 times. 87 cents. Not enough for a loaf of bread. The phone had been disconnected 2 days ago, so she couldn't even call anyone for help. Not that she knew who to call anyway. Rosa sat down at the small kitchen table where they used to eat meals together. The surface was scratched and wobbly, but it had been theirs. Now even this simple table felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. Carmen was playing with Aina on the floor, making up a song about butterflies. Their innocent laughter filled the quiet apartment, and Rosa felt her chest tighten with love and fear. These beautiful children trusted her completely. They believed she would take care of them, feed them, keep them safe, but Rosa was failing them. She looked around the small apartment that had been their home for 2 years. The furniture was old and worn, but it was clean. Rosa had always kept it clean. The children's drawings were taped to the walls, bright pictures of flowers and houses and stick figure families. In Aina's drawings, the stick figure mother was always much bigger than everyone else, like mothers were supposed to be. Strong and capable and able to solve any problem. Rosa didn't feel strong or capable. She felt small and scared and completely alone. The afternoon sun was getting lower, and Rosa realized that this would be the second day her children went to bed hungry. Tomorrow would be 3 days. How long could little children go without food? The thought made her feel sick. She needed a miracle. She needed help from somewhere, anywhere. She needed someone to care about 3 hungry children and their mother who was trying so hard but failing so completely. Rosa had never felt so helpless in her entire life. The evening shadows grew longer across the apartment floor as Rosa watched her children trying to play. Miguel had found an old deck of cards with 3 missing, and he was teaching his sisters a simple game. But Rosa could see how tired they all looked. Their movements were slower than usual, and Carmen wasn't bouncing around like she normally did. Aina sat quietly beside her brother, holding her cards, but not really paying attention to the game. Every few minutes, she would put her small hand on her stomach and make a soft whimpering sound. It was the kind of sound that made Rosa's heart feel like it was being squeezed in a fist. Rosa tried to distract herself by cleaning, but there wasn't much left to clean. She'd already wiped down every surface twice, folded the same clothes 3 times, and organized their few belongings until everything was perfectly in place. Staying busy usually helped her think better, but tonight her mind felt foggy and desperate. She kept thinking about her grandmother, Abuela Carmen, who had raised her after her parents died in a car accident. Abuela Carmen had been a woman of deep faith, always talking about God's love and protection. Rosa could still remember sitting in the small wooden pews at St. Michael's Church every Sunday, listening to her grandmother's whispered prayers. Mia, Abuela Carmen used to say, "God sees everything. He knows when even the smallest bird is hungry." How much more does he care about us? But Rosa had stopped believing in all that years ago. When her husband Elise died in that construction accident, leaving her alone with 3 small children, Rosa had felt abandoned by everyone, including God. Where was God when Elise fell from that scaffold? Where was God when the insurance company refused to pay? Where was God when she had to work 2 jobs just to keep food on the table? Prayer had seemed like a waste of time when there were bills to pay and children to feed. But now, as Rosa watched Ana lean against Miguel's shoulder with exhaustion, she found herself remembering those old prayers. Her grandmother's voice seemed to echo in the quiet apartment. When you have nowhere else to turn, Mia, you turn to God. He's always listening, even when we think he's not there. The sun was setting outside their window, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. In a few hours, it would be completely dark, and Rosa would have to face another night of putting her children to bed with empty stomachs. The thought made her legs feel weak. Miguel looked up from the card game and caught Rosa's eye. "Mama, I'm not really hungry," he said quietly. "Carmen and Ana can have my food when we get some." The words hit Rosa like a physical blow. Her 8-year-old son was trying to take care of his sisters, sacrificing his own needs because he thought it was his job to be the man of the house. Rosa had to turn away so he wouldn't see the tears in her eyes. "You don't worry about that, baby," she managed to say. "Mama will figure something out." But what was she going to figure out? She had already swallowed her pride and asked for help everywhere she could think of. She'd stood in line at the welfare office for 4 hours, only to be told she needed more paperwork. She'd called every church in the phone book before their phone got disconnected, but most of them said their food pantries were empty too. Rosa walked to the kitchen and stared at the cabinets one more time. Maybe if she looked hard enough, she'd find something she'd missed. A can of soup hiding behind something else. A forgotten box of crackers. Anything that could feed 3 hungry children. But the shelves were bare. She opened the refrigerator and looked at the half container of milk. It was all they had left, and it would go bad by tomorrow. Should she give it to the children now or save it for morning? How do you decide something like that? Rosa closed the refrigerator door and leaned against it, feeling the cool metal against her forehead. She was so tired. Not just tired from lack of sleep, but tired in her bones, tired in her soul. She felt like she'd been carrying a heavy weight for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. From the living room, she could hear Carmen starting to cry softly. "My tummy hurts," she was telling Miguel. "It feels empty." Miguel's voice was gentle but worried. "I know, Carmen. Mine too. But Mama said she's working on it." Rosa felt something break inside her chest. Her children were suffering, and she couldn't fix it. She couldn't make food appear out of thin air. She couldn't make money grow on trees. She couldn't even comfort them with promises because she didn't know if she could keep them. For the first time in years, Rosa felt completely powerless. She walked slowly to her bedroom and closed the door behind her. The room was small and dark, with just enough space for a bed and a small dresser. Rosa sat on the edge of the bed and put her head in her hands. The silence in the room felt heavy and thick. Through the thin walls, she could still hear her children in the living room, trying to be brave for each other. Miguel was telling them a story about brave knights and magical kingdoms, but his voice sounded tired and weak. Rosa looked up at the ceiling and felt anger rising in her chest. Where was the God her grandmother had talked about? Where was the God who was supposed to care about hungry children? If he really existed, how could he let 3 innocent kids go to bed hungry night after night? But even as the angry thoughts filled her mind, Rosa felt something else stirring inside her. It was desperation, but it was also something that felt almost like hope. Maybe her grandmother had been right. Maybe there was someone listening, someone who could help when everything else had failed. Rosa slipped off the bed and onto her knees beside it. The hardwood floor felt cold against her legs, but she barely noticed. Her hands were shaking as she pressed them together the way Abuela Carmen had taught her so many years ago. She tried to remember how to pray, but the words felt clumsy and unfamiliar in her mind. It had been so long since she talked to God that she wasn't sure she remembered how. "I don't know if you're really there," she whispered into the quiet room. Her voice sounded small and broken, even to herself. "I stopped believing in you, long time ago. When Luis died, when everything fell apart, I thought you had forgotten about us." Tears started rolling down her cheeks, but she kept talking. "I've tried everything I can think of. I've asked everyone I know for help. I've stood in lines and filled out papers and begged people to give me a chance. But nothing's working. My babies are hungry, and I don't know what to do anymore." Rosa's voice got stronger as the words poured out of her. "Miguel is trying to take care of his sisters because he thinks it's his job. Carmen is getting weak, and she doesn't understand why there's no food. And Ana has stopped asking for anything because she's given up. They trust me to take care of them, but I'm failing them." She took a shaky breath and continued. "I know I haven't talked to you in a long time. I know I stopped believing and stopped coming to church and stopped praying. But I'm asking now. I'm begging you, please help my children. They don't deserve this. They're good kids, and they're innocent, and they need food." Rosa's whole body was shaking now, and tears were streaming down her face. "If you're really there, if you really care about people like my grandmother said you do, please show me. Please help us. I don't need much, just enough food to feed my babies tonight. Just enough to keep them going." She paused, feeling words forming in her heart that surprised her. "And if you do, if you really help us, I promise I'll serve you for the rest of my life. I'll do whatever you want me to do. I'll help other people the way I need help right now. Just please don't let my children go to bed hungry again." The room fell silent, except for the sound of Rosa's quiet crying. Rosa wiped her eyes and slowly stood up from beside the bed. Her knees ached from kneeling on the hard floor, but something inside her felt different. Not better exactly, but different. Like she had finally let go of a weight she'd been carrying. For too long, she opened her bedroom door and walked back to the living room where her children were still sitting, together on the floor. Miguel had his arms around both his sisters now, and they were all leaning against each other like three small birds huddled together for warmth. "Mama," Carmen said when she saw Rosa coming, "Miguel told us a story about a magic kitchen that makes food appear. Do you think there are really magic kitchens?" Rosa sat down on the floor with them and pulled all three children close to her. "I think," she said carefully, "that sometimes help comes from places we don't expect." Ana looked up at her mother with those big, serious eyes. "Are we going to be okay, Mama?" Rosa kissed the top of Ana's head, breathing in the sweet smell of her daughter's hair. "Yes, baby, we're going to be okay." She didn't know why she felt so sure about that, but she did. Something had changed when she prayed, something she couldn't explain. For the first time in weeks, Rosa felt like maybe they weren't completely alone. The apartment was getting darker as the sun finished setting outside. Rosa got up to turn on the lights, but then remembered that the electricity bill was overdue too. She left the lights off and lit the 2 candles she'd been saving for emergencies. The warm glow filled the small living room, making everything look softer and more peaceful. "Look," Carmen said, pointing at the candles. "It's like a fancy restaurant." Miguel smiled for the first time all day. "Yeah, like the places rich people go to eat. We can pretend we're having a fancy dinner," Ana added, her voice still quiet but with a tiny spark of interest. Rosa was about to suggest they play that game when she heard something that made her freeze. A soft knock at the door. Her heart started beating faster. It was almost 8 o'clock at night. Who would be knocking at this hour? The landlord? Someone from the city? Rosa had learned to be afraid of unexpected visitors because they usually brought bad news. The knock came again, gentle but persistent. "Stay here," Rosa whispered to the children. She walked quietly to the door and looked through the PEEPHOLE.N. Older woman stood in the hallway, holding what looked like several grocery bags. Rosa had never seen her before, but she looked harmless enough. She was probably in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and kind eyes behind. Wire-rimmed glasses. Rosa hesitated. She wasn't in the habit of opening her door to strangers, especially with her children in the apartment. But something about the woman's face looked gentle and trustworthy. Rosa unlocked the door and opened it just a crack, keeping the chain lock. Attached? Yes, she said quietly. The woman smiled warmly. Hello, dear. My name is Isabella Rivera. I live in apartment 4B, just down the hall. I hope I'm not bothering you. Rosa recognized the name from the mailboxes downstairs, but she'd never actually met this neighbor. What can I do for you? Isabella held up the grocery bags. This might sound strange, but I was making dinner tonight, and I kept feeling like I should cook more food, much more food. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone nearby needed a meal. Rosa's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the bags in Isabella's hands, hardly believing what she was hearing. I know we don't know each other, Isabella continued, but I've seen you with your children sometimes, and they seem like such good kids. I was wondering, would you mind if I shared some food with your family? I made way too much, and I hate to see it go to waste. Rosa's hands started shaking. She looked at Isabella's face, searching for any sign that this was some kind of joke or trick. But the older woman's eyes were sincere and kind, with no hint of pity or judgment. I don't understand, Rosa whispered. Isabella's smile got even warmer. To be honest, dear, I don't understand it either. I was just cooking my usual dinner for one, and suddenly I felt this strong feeling that I needed to make enough food for a whole family. It was the strangest thing. I've lived alone for 15 years since my husband passed, and I never cook big meals anymore. Rosa's legs felt weak. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. I have rice and beans, fresh bread, some chicken, and vegetables, Isabella continued. And I picked up some milk and juice from the store because something told me to. I know it sounds crazy, but I just had this feeling that someone needed these things tonight. Rosa's eyes filled with tears. Through the crack in the door, she could see Isabella's face clearly now. There was something almost glowing about her expression, something peaceful and sure. Why? Rosa asked, her voice barely audible. Isabella tilted her head, considering the question. You know, I've been asking myself the same thing. I was sitting in my kitchen about an hour ago, and I suddenly felt this overwhelming need to cook and shop and bring food to someone. I've never felt anything like it before. It was like someone was telling me exactly what to do. An hour ago, Rosa's heart started pounding. An hour ago, she had been on her knees in her bedroom, praying with more desperation than she'd ever felt in her life. Are you all right, dear? Isabella asked gently. You look like you've seen a ghost. Rosa slowly unhooked the chain lock and opened the door wider. Isabella stepped into the hallway light, and Rosa could see her more clearly now. She was dressed simply in a blue cardigan and dark pants, but there was something almost radiant about her presence. Mrs. Rivera, Rosa said, her voice shaking, I have to ask you something. What time did you start cooking tonight? Isabella looked puzzled but answered anyway. Well, let's see. I usually eat dinner around 6, but tonight I started cooking around 7. Why do you ask? 7 o'clock. Rosa had finished praying at exactly 7 o'clock. Mrs. Rivera, Rosa said, opening the door all the way, I think you're an angel. Isabella. Laugh, a warm musical sound. Oh, honey, I'm no angel. I'm just a retired school teacher who lives alone and apparently cooks too much food sometimes. But Rosa was already crying again, this time from relief and amazement instead of despair. You don't understand. My children haven't eaten in 2 days. I lost my job, and we're out of food. And I was just ... I was just praying for help. Isabella's expression changed immediately. The gentle smile was replaced by concern and understanding. "Oh, you poor dear." And here I was, wondering why I felt so compelled to cook enough food for an army. She handed the bags to Rosa without another word. "These are for you and your children. All of it." Rosa took the bags with trembling hands. They were heavy, filled, with more food than her family had seen in weeks. The smell of fresh bread made her stomach clench with hunger and hope. "Mrs. Rivera, I can't pay you back right now," Rosa said, tears streaming down her face. "I don't have any money." Isabella waved her hand dismissively. "Who said anything about paying me back? This is a gift, dear." From one neighbor to another. She paused and looked directly into Rosa's eyes. "Actually, I have a feeling this is a gift from someone much higher up than me." "I was just a delivery person," Rosa nodded, unable to speak. She knew exactly who Isabella meant. "Now," Isabella said, her practical voice returning, "you go feed those beautiful children of yours. And if you need anything else, anything at all, I'm just down the hall in 4B. As Isabella turned to leave, Rosa found her voice again. "Mrs. Rivera, wait, can I ask you one more thing?" "Of course, dear." Do you believe in prayer?" Isabella smiled and patted Rosa's hand gently. "Honey, after tonight, I believe in prayer more than ever before. Someone was definitely listening to someone tonight." She walked back down the hall, leaving Rosa standing in her doorway holding bags full of food and hope. Rosa closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, holding the heavy grocery bags in her arms. Her heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. She looked down at the bags, half expecting them to disappear like something from a dream, but they were real. She could smell the fresh bread through the paper bags, could feel the weight of canned goods and the cool dampness from what must be fresh vegetables. "Mama?" Miguel's voice called from the living room. Who was at the door? Rosa wiped her eyes and walked back to where her children were sitting by the candlelight. When they saw the bags in her hands, all three of them stared with wide eyes. "Is that food?" Carmen whispered, as if speaking too loudly might make it vanish. Rosa set the bags down on the coffee table and started pulling things out one by one. A whole roasted chicken, still warm in its container. A bag of fresh rolls that smelled like heaven. Canned beans, rice, fresh apples, bananas, a carton of milk, and even a small container of chocolate chip cookies. Aina crawled closer and reached out to touch one of the apples, then looked up at Rosa with wonder. "Are these really for us?" "Yes, baby," Rosa said, her voice thick with emotion. "These are all for us." Miguel stood up and walked over to the table. He picked up the container of chicken and looked at it like he couldn't believe it was real. "Mama, how did you get all this food?" Rosa sat down on the floor with her children and pulled them close. "Do you remember how I told you that sometimes help comes from places we don't expect?" They all nodded. "Well, there's a nice lady who lives down the hall, and she felt like she should cook extra food tonight. She brought it all to us to share." Carmen clapped her hands together. "She must be magic." Rosa smiled through her tears. "Maybe she is, baby. Maybe she is." "Can we eat now?" Aina asked in a small voice, and Rosa realized that her youngest daughter had been afraid to ask, afraid to hope. "Yes." "Sweetheart, we can eat right now." Rosa had never prepared a meal so carefully in her life. She warmed the chicken in their small oven, heated the beans on the stove, and set the table with their best plates. The children watched every move she made, their eyes following her hands as she opened containers and arranged food on their dishes. When Rosa finally set the plates on the table, the children just stared at the food for a long moment. "It's really okay to eat it?" Miguel asked. "Yes, honey. Eat as much as you want." What happened next was something Rosa will remember for the rest of her life. Her children ate slowly at first, like they were afraid the food might disappear. But then Carmen took a big bite of chicken and started crying happy tears. "It tastes so good, Mama," she said between bites. Aina was eating a roll with butter, and she kept making little humming sounds of happiness. Miguel was trying to eat slowly and politely, but Rosa could see how hungry he was by the way his hands shook as he cut his chicken. "Miguel," Rosa said gently, "you don't have to eat like we're at a fancy restaurant. This is our food, in our home. Eat however you want." Miguel nodded and took a bigger bite, and Rosa saw some of the tension leave his small shoulders. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds being the gentle clinking of forks and the satisfied sighs of people who had been truly hungry. Rosa found that she was almost too emotional to eat at first. Watching her children's faces as they tasted real food after 2 days of hunger was better than any meal she'd ever had. But then her stomach reminded her that she'd been just as hungry as they were, and she started eating too. The chicken was perfectly seasoned, the beans were rich and flavorful, and the bread was soft and warm. It was simple food, but it tasted like the most delicious meal she'd ever eaten. "Mama," Ana said after she'd finished most of her plate, "my tummy doesn't hurt anymore." "Mine either," Carmen added. "It feels happy now." Miguel was still eating steadily, making up for lost time. "This is the best dinner ever," he said between bites. After they finished the main course, Rosa brought out the cookies Isabella had included. The children's eyes lit up like it was Christmas morning. "Real cookies?" Carmen asked in amazement. "Real cookies," Rosa confirmed. They each took one cookie and ate it slowly, savoring every bite. Rosa took one too, and the sweet chocolate chips seemed to melt away some of the fear and stress she'd been carrying. When they were finally done eating, Rosa helped the children get ready for bed. For the first time in days, they went to sleep with full stomachs and peaceful expressions. Miguel didn't lie awake worrying about his sisters. Carmen fell asleep quickly instead of tossing and turning from hunger. Ana curled up in her bed with a contented side dot after the children were asleep. Rosa sat alone in the kitchen, looking at the leftover food. There was enough for breakfast tomorrow, and lunch too. Maybe even dinner if she was careful. For the first time in weeks, she didn't have to worry about where their next meal would come from. Rosa thought about Isabella Rivera and the strange way she had appeared at exactly the right moment. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. Rosa had finished praying at 7 o'clock, and Isabella had started cooking at 7 o'clock. They lived in the same building, but had never met before tonight. Rosa had always been a practical person, someone who believed in hard work and making her own way in the world. But what had happened tonight was beyond anything practical or logical. It was something else entirely. She remembered her promise to God, the words she had spoken while kneeling beside her bed. "If you really help us, I promise I'll serve you for the rest of my life." Now, sitting in her quiet kitchen with the evidence of answered prayer all around her, Rosa felt the weight of that promise. But it didn't feel heavy or scary. It felt right, like something she was meant to do. She thought about Isabella, who had been moved to cook for strangers and had followed that feeling without question. Isabella had been used to help someone else, and she'd seemed happy to do it. Maybe that's what serving God looked like. Being ready to help when help was needed. Rosa started making plans in her mind. Tomorrow she would look for work again, but this time with hope instead of desperation. She would also find a way to thank Isabella properly, and she would find a way to help other people the way Isabella had helped her. She thought about the food bank that had been empty when she needed it. Maybe when she got back on her feet, she could volunteer there. She could help stock the shelves so other mothers wouldn't have to leave. Empty-handed. She thought about the other families in the building who might be struggling too. Mrs. Chun, on the second floor, who always looked tired. The young couple in 3A who had just had a baby. Maybe Rosa could check on them sometimes. The way Isabella had checked on her. Rosa got up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there were other mothers praying desperate prayers, other children going to bed, hungry, other families facing impossible situations. But Rosa now knew something she hadn't known that morning. She knew that prayers were heard, that help could come from unexpected places, and that ordinary people could be part of something. Extraordinary. She thought about her grandmother's words. When you have nowhere else to turn, you turn to God. But Rosa was beginning to understand that it wasn't just about turning to God when you needed help. It was also about being available to help when God needed you. Isabella had been available tonight. She had listened to that strange feeling telling her to cook extra food, and she had acted on it. Because of her willingness to follow that feeling, 3 children had gone to sleep with full stomachs. Rosa wanted to be that kind of person too. She wanted to be someone who listened and helped and served. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Because she had experienced what it felt like to receive help when you needed it. Most tomorrow would bring new challenges. Rosa knew. There were still bills to pay and jobs to find and problems to solve. But tonight, her children were safe and fed and sleeping peacefully. And that was enough to fill her heart with gratitude and her mind with purpose. 2 years had passed since that desperate night when Rosa knelt on her bedroom floor and made a promise to God. Now she stood in front of her room, full of 20 volunteers at the Riverside Community Center, holding a clipboard and smiling at the eager faces looking back at her. "Good morning, everyone," Rosa said, her voice confident and warm. "Welcome to our new volunteer orientation for the weekend food distribution program." It still amazed Rosa sometimes to think about how much her life had changed. The scared, desperate woman who had once stood in empty food banks begging for help was now the one running the program. But the journey from that night to this morning had been filled with small miracles and hard work. The day after Isabella brought them food, Rosa had woken up with a new sense of hope. She'd spent the morning playing with her children, watching them laugh and run around with energy they hadn't had in days. After lunch, she'd gone down to apartment 4B to thank Isabella properly. Isabella had invited her in for coffee, and they'd talked for hours. It turned out that Isabella was a retired teacher who had been looking for ways to help her community. She told Rosa about a job opening at the community center where she volunteered. They needed someone to help coordinate their various assistance programs. "I don't have any experience with that kind of work," Rosa had said. Isabella had smiled knowingly. "Honey, you have the most important experience there is. You know what it feels like to need help. That's worth more than any degree or training." Rosa had applied for the job the next week. During the interview, she'd been honest about her situation, the job loss, the struggle to feed her children, the night when she thought she had no options left. Instead of seeing these things as weaknesses, the director had seen them as exactly what they were looking for. "We need someone who understands what our clients are going through," the director had explained. "Someone who can connect with people when they're at their lowest point." Rosa got the job, and it had changed everything. Not just because of the steady paycheck, though that had been a huge relief. It was because she'd found her purpose, the way she could keep her promise to serve. Now, looking at the new volunteers in front of her, Rosa saw herself in some of their faces. There was Janet, a single mother whose husband had left her with 2 young kids. There was David, a man in his 50s who had been laid off from his factory job and was struggling to find work. There was Patricia, a grandmother who was raising her grandson because his parents couldn't take care of him. "I want to start today by telling you why this work matters," Rosa continued. "But first, I want to tell you a story." Rosa had learned that sharing her own experience was the best way to help volunteers understand what they were really doing. It wasn't just about handing out food. It was about giving people hope when they felt like they had none left. 3 years ago, I lost my job," Rosa began. "I had 3 young children and no savings. We ran out of food, and I didn't know where to turn. I went to food banks, but they were empty. I applied for assistance, but the waiting lists were long. For 2 days, my children went to bed hungry." She saw the volunteers leaning forward, their attention completely focused on her words. On the second night, I was desperate. I got down on my knees and prayed like I'd never prayed before. I asked God to help my children, and I promised that if He did, I would spend my life serving others. Rosa paused, remembering that night and how hopeless she'd felt. Less than an hour later, a neighbor I'd never met knocked on my door. She had bags full of food and said she felt compelled to cook extra dinner. She didn't know we were hungry. She just followed a feeling that told her someone needed help. Several of the volunteers had tears in their eyes now. Rosa could see that they understood this wasn't just a job for her. That neighbor saved my family that night. But more than that, she showed me how God works through ordinary people who are willing to listen and help. Today, you're going to be that person for someone else. Rosa divided the volunteers into teams and explained how the food distribution worked. Every Saturday morning, families could come to the community center and receive groceries to last them through the week. It was all free, no questions asked, no paperwork required. Some people will be embarrassed to be here, Rosa explained as they walked through the distribution area. They might apologize or make excuses. Just smile and treat them with dignity. Remember that it takes courage to ask for help. Miguel, now 10 years old, appeared at Rosa's side carrying a box of canned goods. He'd been helping with the program since the beginning, and the volunteers always loved seeing how responsible and caring he was. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Mrs. Patricia needs help setting up the produce table." Rosa smiled and ruffled his hair. "Thanks. Honey, can you show the new volunteers where the produce goes?" Miguel nodded seriously and led a group of volunteers toward the fresh fruits and vegetables. Rosa watched him go, remembering the scared 8-year-old who had tried to take care of his sisters when they had no food. Now he was helping other families who were going through what they had experienced. Carmen and Ana were there too, helping sort items and greeting families with bright smiles. All 3 children understood why this work was important. They remembered what it felt like to be hungry, and they wanted to make sure other kids didn't have to feel that way. At 9 o'clock, Rosa opened the doors to the community. The first family through was a young mother with twin toddlers. Rosa could see the exhaustion and worry in the woman's eyes, the same look she used to see in her own mirror. "Good morning," Rosa said warmly. "Welcome to our food distribution. I'm Rosa, and I'll help you get everything you need." The woman looked nervous and embarrassed. "I've never done this before," she said quietly. "I don't know how it works." "Don't worry," Rosa said gently. "We'll take care of everything. Can you tell me how many people are in your family?" As Rosa helped the woman select groceries, she remembered Isabella's kindness and how it had felt to receive help when she needed it most. Now she had the chance to be that person for someone else. Throughout the morning, families came and went. There was an elderly man who hadn't eaten in 2 days because his Social Security check was late. A teenager who was taking care of his younger siblings because their parents were both working multiple jobs, but still couldn't make ends meet. A family who had just moved to town and didn't have money for groceries until the father's first paycheck came in. Each person had a story, and Rosa listened to as many as people were willing to share. She remembered how alone she had felt during her darkest time, and she wanted everyone who came through their doors to know that someone cared about their situation. Mrs. Martinez called David, one of the new volunteers. "There's a woman here who's asking specifically for you." Rosa looked toward the entrance and saw Isabella Rivera walking in with a big smile on her face. Even though they lived in the same building and had become close friends, Isabella always came to the food distribution to volunteer and to see Rosa in action. "How's our miracle worker doing today?" Isabella asked, giving Rosa a warm hug. "I'm just doing what you taught me," Rosa replied, listening to that feeling that says someone needs help. Isabella looked around at the busy distribution center. The volunteers working with care and compassion, the families leaving with hope and dignity intact. "You know," Isabella said, "I still get that feeling sometimes, the same one I had that night when I cooked all that food. But now it tells me that the person who needed help has become the person who gives help. And that's exactly how it's supposed to work." Rosa nodded, understanding completely. She had kept her promise to serve, but more than that, she had found her calling. Every Saturday, she got to be part of someone else's miracle, just like Isabella had been part of hers. As the morning Wound down and the last families were helped, Rosa looked around at her volunteers packing up supplies and cleaning tables. They would all go home today feeling good about what they'd accomplished, but Rosa knew they'd gotten even more than they'd given. Same time next week? Miguel asked, carrying an empty box to storage. Same time next week, Rosa confirmed. There are always people who need help, and will always be here to provide it. Because that was what serving really meant, showing up consistently, listening for opportunities to help, and never forgetting what it felt like to need someone to care.